and welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
So to everybody watching, listening, this will be as a podcast too, audio podcast, off of my SoundCloud and also the website. But I haven't had much sleep, but I couldn't turn this interview down. I've had about 3 hours of sleep in the past, I guess almost 2 days, I guess now. So, but anyways, I'm ready to rock and roll, a little bit caffeinated, and I'm ready to dive into this. Man, I don't even know what to call it. This rabbit hole. It's so. Let's go. What made you? I guess first off, with those that are unfamiliar with you, Michael, and your research, I guess give us a little rundown of who Dr. Michael P. Masters is and what led you down this road to research. I guess what maybe the mainstream may call fringe science.
Yeah, I mean it's been kind of a lifelong pursuit, to be honest. It started when I was a young kid and heard a story my dad told about having a UFO run-in a few years before I was born, I guess. But I was 8 years old and heard him telling the story to some friends that were over at our house, and it really piqued my interest. And um, he just started to kind of wonder if there could be some connection with ourselves, if these aliens could just be us from the future. I remember seeing the cover of the book Communion by Whitley Strieber, and it sort of created this imagery in my head. And I don't know, I had this question pop up and wondered if there could be some biological evolutionary relationship between our past leading up to now and then continued forward into the future. So went to school for physics and astronomy at Ohio University down in Athens, Ohio, and then switched to anthropology about halfway through, finished up there, went to Ohio State, got a PhD at Ohio State, and came out to Montana Tech out here in Butte, Montana. Been here for just over 10 years now. Been researching, writing papers, and your standard academic journal articles. And then about 7 years ago, I decided I want to start working on this book, kind of investigating this phenomenon in the context of our long-term evolutionary trends, both in culture and biology. And spent 7 years putting it together, just published it back in March. Ironically, 10 years to the day that I graduated from Ohio State. I didn't even realize that. And then I was standing over in the corner there and I saw my diploma from OSU and it said March 22nd on it, 2009. I thought, oh shit, that was exactly 10 years to the day that I released this book. So
That's my birthday also, March 22nd,
oh, no kidding.
3/22/86. Come on
Man,
now.
the synchronicity continues. So yeah, no, it's been a fun ride. I still do the academic journals and conferences, and just submit an abstract for the big conference in our field this week, and it's good to have both. But I've really been enjoying getting out to the UFO conferences too, and meeting people and talking about the research in the book. So it's been a lot of fun over the last few months.
What do your friends and colleagues, I guess, think about this, everything that you're into, your research and your book?
It's been really, really positive, honestly. I think during my book release, at least 30-40% of the people there were fellow PhDs or engineers or scientists in some capacity. The theory makes a lot of sense, and it's backed up by some sound scientific evidence, and really looks at it in the context of Occam's razor and the simplest solution. So I think the ones that are aware of what I'm doing and how I'm doing it have been overwhelmingly supportive. The ones that are more dismissive really they just got their head up their ass. Honestly, they're not doing their job as scientists, because we're supposed to be asking these questions and we're supposed to be trying to get answers to some of the most fascinating, mysterious things of our time. And the people that just dismiss anything outright because it has something to do with UFOs or consciousness, spirits, ghosts, whatever, they're doing a disservice to the scientific community and to themselves. So most of my colleagues, at least in and around this area, and ones who I've known for a long time, they realize that, and they're really supportive of this work.
So, what made you, I guess, come to the conclusion that UFOs and or I guess aliens are possibly us from the future, Michael?
Well, it's funny you asked that because it started as sort of this I don't know, flash of awareness, I guess, back when I was 8. And I've studied it very thoroughly since then, but obviously aware of potential biases, confirmation bias specifically, where if I'm only looking for answers to this question through this lens of time travel and human evolution, and that's all I'm going to see. So I'm very aware of that potential bias uh, and acknowledged that in the book early on. But what's funny about it is the book mostly focuses on the science of our biological cultural evolution, the science behind astronomy, astrobiology, physics, time travel, how that could actually happen. And there's only a small part about abduction accounts and what people see in these instances of close encounters. But more recently, I've been working on a presentation for Contact in the Desert, which happens in May. Excuse me. And I'm looking at more of these accounts, more of these classic abduction cases or close encounters, like Calvin Parker and Jim Peniston, Amy Rylance, and Betty and Barney Hill, and in the context of our humanness and these humanoid beings. And it's crazy to go down this rabbit hole more. Like I said, I touched on it in the book, but to hear these accounts and the way they describe these individuals, they're human. They're human in every sense of the word. Calvin Parker, in a recent interview on the UFO News Network, even said that this woman looked like a human, but like kind of a different race of humans. And rather than being a geographic race, that's a temporal race. It's one from a different time who has different traits because of that temporal ancestry. So to hear all of these descriptions and the humanness of these individuals, obviously there's exceptions. There's the reptilian, mantis men, dog man type things. But for the most part, the vast majority of these describe individuals just like us doing exactly what I would do as an anthropologist, as a biomedical researcher, if I had access to time travel technology.
And I'm going to try to get Calvin Parker in person also, because I've probably had 25 to 30 in-person interviews, and he's about 4 hours away from me. I
Yeah,
think.
he's in your area.
Yeah.
He was just at the International UFO Congress down in Phoenix last month, and yeah, I think he's from Alabama, maybe, or
Pascagoula or around that
Pascagoula.
area,
Yeah, yeah.
And
So he's not too far from you.
so if these aliens or UFOs are actually coming from the future, Michael, do you think that or do you think that they are possibly tampering and possibly changing the timelines that will change the course in the future? Kind of like the grandfather's paradox.
Yeah, no, I don't necessarily, but I also will admit that I can't know the answer to that question. No, nobody can yet, until we are able to meld Einstein's general theory of relativity with quantum mechanics. We can't know that answer. I mostly approach these questions in the context of block time, and mostly draw from the research of Russian physicist Igor Novikov and the Novikov self-consistency principle, where essentially uh, it looks at it in the context of there not being paradoxes. If your grandfather is alive, you never killed him and you never will. You don't have to worry about those things because anything you did in the past already exists, as in any ramifications of anything you did in the past already exists in that future before you even leave to go back into the past. There's this self-consistency, and it's a lot of our problems with thinking about time stem from the fact that we don't talk about time. and that we see it as this linear thing. There's this arrow of time as we perceive it, but that's not necessarily how it works. And in fact, in physics, everything outside of some aspects of quantum mechanics are time reversible. They make just as much sense running backwards as forwards. So it's our biological perception to see things as being linear, but outside of our perception, they can be reversed. They can happen in either direction. And it's the same thing with time travel. If you go back into the past, it's already there. Everything you were going to have done exists in that past. You see it as your future, you see it as you doing it, but it's already happened simply as a result of you connecting those two previously disparate periods in time. And again, that's all in the context of the most widely held understanding of time among physicists, which is this idea of block time, that all of the universe exists as this massive four-dimensional block of time where everything that has ever happened from the Big Bang to the very end of the universe is already there. It's already structured as part of this giant block. So simply moving throughout these different periods within this block doesn't create paradoxes. Everything already exists as interconnected among those different periods of time.
One of these comments, it's kind of long, but I have to read it. It's going to blow your mind. It's
right.
going to make you think. This was a comment off of your interview with Jimmy Church, Fade to Black.
Oh man, that's old school.
But check this comment out. All right, you ready for it?
Yeah, hit me.
All right, this is by Lewis. The past is what humans assign to what is based on memories, recorded data, and artifacts. The future is what humans assign to projections of what will happen based on what we know of the cycles and processes as indicated in the past. These are very helpful in human evolution so that we can learn patterns, then solve problems and plan. What we consider the present is matter and energy at a particular point in which we can compare and count the various cycles of things. By counting pendulum swings to complete rotations of the earth and watching the numbers between the two change, we know time has elapsed. However, the past and the future do not exist as actual spaces to which travel can occur. H.G. Wells created the science fiction concept of time travel. It doesn't exist because time as a true dimension does not really exist. We can get to that in a minute. We can agree to meet at a particular time, but that is merely a projection of our intent. Time dilation and relativity based on speed and gravity can occur in which twins can go from one environment at one speed of time to another speed of time and will be older than the other. However, no one is really time traveling any more than someone is in a suspended state of animation, wakes up after a century, and then has traveled to the future. What we call the present is the result of various preceding processes. The preceding state exists nowhere, only the present one does. The future is a projection of the possibilities should, but considering the number of variables may not occur. It does not exist. The problem with the useful way for humans to process information and plan is that it can create illusions. And lastly, time paradoxes cannot occur because time travel is not possible. What has occurred is now contained in the resulting present. So at present, there is nothing to go back to. This is the problem when physicists say they don't really know what time is. The truth is time exists in the human languages as tense systems. I'm not sure what that word is. This works well for us, but what we see as a bigger concept of time does not exist. What do you think of that comment?
I mean, there's a lot to unpack there.
I know that's
Touches on a lot of different aspects of time. The the idea that it's just some sort of mental projection, especially the future. I mean, to separate those in the past and future and to say only the present exists doesn't really match up with the physical reality. So if we say the future is just some sort of projection, I forget the exact term used, I was trying to write it down, but if we say that that's just some future projection of possible states that could result from the past, it's also important to keep in mind that to someone in the future, that is their past. And there is a physical reality, and there are things that happened, and there are tangible outcomes from people living through those periods of time. So Yeah, this idea that time doesn't exist really runs counter to the physical evidence that we see all around us. One thing that I have gotten the opportunity to do, which I feel very fortunate about, is travel all around the world and examine the material culture of past societies. And I got to work in a couple seasons in South Africa, excavating, looking for our past hominin ancestors, 3.5 million year old ancestors of ours. Clearly, they existed, or we wouldn't be here right now. There has to have been uh, a chain of events that led to this present. So to say that those don't exist outside of our perception doesn't really make sense. And the same thing going into the future. We can't see those physical outcomes yet, but to someone in that future, they can see that past. So yeah, I don't necessarily buy into that. I have heard that before, and it's similar to the simulation hypothesis and the idea that, it's true, we don't understand time completely yet, and a big part of that, as I mentioned, is that we'll have to circle that square between general relativity, and quantum mechanics. And once that happens, I think we will have a deeper understanding, and really will be able to understand the holistic nature of time and those physical aspects of it in a much deeper sense. But no, it's an interesting question. It's an
Yeah,
interesting comment.
I just don't understand because it's, he stated, however, the past and the future do not exist as actual spaces to which travel can occur. H.G. Wells created the science fiction concept of time travel. It does not exist. My thing is, Michael, how can you say something doesn't exist? Because, um, I don't know, us in the future, let's say 500,000 years from now, who's to say we don't have the technologies or the means to create such technologies for us to time travel? You know what I mean?
Yeah, just because it doesn't exist now doesn't mean it won't. And when we see these UFOs, which I think are the actual time machine, and what I argue in the book is this basic idiom in biology that applies to anything really, is that form follows function. And the form of these craft seem to correlate very well with the function of creating closed time light curves, and warping space time to the extent that your light cones can be reversed and you can travel into the past globally, global space time, traveling into the past that way, but you're still moving forward in your local frame of reference. And you're able to separate the two so that you, within that craft and probably the area around it, is moving forward, but going backward into the past as they do those things. And a lot of the solutions to Einstein's field equations that have been put forth since he published his paper on general relativity in 1915 have involved the rotation of a massive or highly energetic sphere, solenoid, ring, or disk in many cases. And these UFOs seem to have all of those properties. They're highly energetic. The electromagnetism that's commonly reported in association with them likely has a lot to do with the propulsion as a means of being an anti-gravity device, but also likely has to do with their ability to warp space-time and to travel into the past. So, um, yeah, I mean, the idea of time travel has certainly been played out in science fiction, but it's also been played out in the actual physics literature is a real possibility. And in fact, the vast majority of physicists agree that it is possible. There's nothing in the laws of physics that prohibit backward time travel.
And also, another comment by Rob. I believe in free will. I believe because of free will, every decision made or not made creates a universe. We have forever to exist in infinity. It's forever. Free will is consciousness experiencing itself, doing everything to find out what it is. Infinity would become stagnant and nothing would move forward without free will. Consciousness would only know one part of itself. We are all one. Free will is the cause of the illusion of separation.
Are you still reading from that Jimmy Church interview?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. No, I pissed off a lot of people that night. Because in talking about block time, you naturally
that
have.
That's the last one from that interview. So go ahead.
No. It was a fine interview, but we did start talking about block time in the context of free will, because if everything in the universe, every moment as we perceive it as the present, or which is the past to somebody else from the future, if you are at the end of time, the end of the universe, the four dimensions of space time, then everything's the past. You can see all of it. We're still looking forward to most of it, so it's obscured to us. But in looking at it as this holistic block of all events that have ever transpired, it doesn't really leave room for this idea of free will. And that pisses people the fuck off. Like, they hate that idea. And I remember, especially after that Fade to Black interview, I got like hate mail from people. Like whenever people email me about the book, it's been tremendously positive and like, hey, this makes a lot of sense. You explain it well. But when you start talking about block time and free will, those people get mad. They
I
get
think
really
there's a connection,
mad.
Michael, with free will. I guess the topic, the discussion of free will, and I hate to say it, and the New Age movement. You know what I mean? I want to
Yeah, I
say
could see
there's a connection there.
Yeah, I could see that. And people, it doesn't bother me at all. I almost feel liberated not having to feel like I'm making decisions. I mean, it feels like I'm making decisions. Everybody feels like they're making decisions, but it was always going to be what you were always going to do. And to me, that's somewhat comforting. But a lot of people just want to feel like that feeling is all it is, that they're creating all of these things. But importantly, if you look back at your life, the same way I was talking about that person at the end of the universe, if you look back at the end of your life, there was only one outcome. Even though we have this idea that there's infinite possibilities, could turn left at that stop sign instead of right. We didn't. We turned one direction. And the evidence, the reality of the situation is that that was always going to happen that way. We have no evidence to the contrary. We have nothing that indicates to us in physical reality that we ever did anything differently. And so, looking back on it from the future to the past, we see one chain of events, we see one outcome that doesn't leave a lot of room for this idea that there were all of these other outcomes. But
I'm
people
not.
hate that.
Yeah, and my thing is, why bash somebody and throw all this hate towards somebody that is researching topics and having an open mind about certain things. I get it all the time. I get these trolls, just because we talk about something or research something, not all the time, just like I told you before the show, not all the time does it mean that we necessarily believe in it.
Yeah.
We are
Yeah.
entertaining the idea. We are
Right.
entertaining the concept, the thought, and
And a
that's
lot of times we're describing other people's conventional understandings of reality, and talking about block time. That's not my personal opinion. That is what the vast majority of physicists uh, have come to understand as the way the universe is and the way the universe works. And I guess it wasn't that bad. I should mention that I've only had one troll since publishing this book 6 months ago. And it was after a coast to coast interview. And it didn't even have anything to do with what I was saying. I used a word they didn't like, and they just raged against me for like dropping F bombs all over the place. And it got pretty insane. But even the people that disagreed about free will were still polite for the most part. They
mhm.
didn't like it. They didn't like hearing that,
I
even though
didn't. I didn't really see that many comments on that interview that were like just pure out just hating on you. They kind of had their
no,
own idea and things,
yeah,
but for the
yeah.
most part, I would say at least 75 to 80% of them, the comments thought it was a very mind awakening interview, a thought provoking interview.
Yeah, and that's all I'm trying to do is present the information from valid scientific studies to a broad audience of people who are interested in this, and it's been very well received. I mean, I've been on coast to coast twice in the last 6 months, and I've done close to 50 interviews for TV and radio and podcasts, and getting invited to conferences, doing documentaries and things. So no, it resonates with people because it makes sense and it's a simple solution. What's simpler than us? Like, we're already here. We know we're here. We don't have to look anywhere in the universe for us. We are here, and we have a long evolutionary history that's likely to continue into the future. And we're likely to have more advanced technology and bigger, rounder heads and bigger eyes and smaller faces and still be bipedal and have less hair and all of these things that are so ubiquitously described in Close Encounters. That's likely to continue. So yeah, no, people understand the simplicity of the idea and how it's backed by scientific evidence as much as it can be, because not everything in this regarding UFOs lends itself well to science, and I acknowledge that in the book. I'm very cautious to separate those things, but we can understand our evolutionary history. We have a lot of data to back up what's happened and what trends have taken place. So I just try to present that in a very non-biased way, and then people can take it and do with it what they want.
Well, the government actually is admitting to what they're calling it UAPs now, unidentified aerial phenomena. So I guess it's kind of mainstream now. Even though we know
Yeah,
we've been talking about it forever, but now it's more mainstream because you have Fox News, CNN, all these other outlets, talking about it. You know,
yeah.
it's but you briefly touched on. I kind of see what I think I know where you might go with the simulation theory hypothesis. Can you elaborate a little bit more on it? Because it seems like, I guess, with the free will, um, I guess your point of view with that, which is very mind blowing. It seems like almost like we do possibly live in a simulation. I'm not talking about like a freaking video game necessarily, but everything is ones and zeros and mathematics and everything. I'm talking about everything. Synchronicities is, which kind of involves, if you want to break it down, with numerology and numbers. And but what is your thoughts with the simulation theory?
To be honest, I haven't looked into it as much as I probably should, because that does come up sometimes. And I know a book just came out about it called The Simulation Hypothesis or Simulation Theory or something like that. So I'm reluctant to comment too much, but from what I understand of it, I don't know. I mean, reality seems real to me. At any point we could find out that it's not. Well, one thing that's interesting to me is just how small things are and how big they are. Like, we're seemingly in the middle of a lot of tininess and a lot of hugeness on both sides of us, and that, I don't know, that's confusing.
I guess you could say the microcosm and the macrocosm, I
Yeah,
guess.
exactly. The micro and macrocosms on either side of us. And yeah, I mean, we could easily be floating around on a speck of dust in somebody's house, or just some tiny little science experiment to really big things. I don't know. I'm certainly not going to criticize any theory. Same thing you were saying earlier. Like, if people are trying to figure things out, we should all be doing that. We should all be asking questions and throwing around different ideas. And it's something
Intelligent
that
conversation.
having intelligent conversations about things. And I've recently come across this idea and saw the book pop up on Amazon a couple of times. I guess people buy my book and this other author's book at the same time, so there must be some overlap. Makes me think I should probably buy it and read it. So I'm probably going to do that
that just
before
let
too long.
just let me know when that'll be part two.
Yeah,
But
sounds good. We'll have a whole show just about that, because
hell
I
yeah.
find it interesting, and but I don't really know enough about it to make any sort of judgment just yet.
So we're going to jump back, I guess, to UFOs and I guess time travel here in just a moment. But I get it kind of all correlates. It kind of just like a jigsaw puzzle, it kind of all fits together, everything we're talking about in a way. If the multiverse or multi-universe theory exists, what if some of these other versions of ourselves in these other realities within the multiverse are further into the evolutionary process? And what if these so-called aliens are not only coming back from our timeline from the future, but coming from the future from other dimensions within this multi-universe model.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting idea.
I was thinking about that when I was taking some notes earlier. So
Yeah,
it
yeah,
kind
and
of,
especially the idea that if there are multiple dimensions, the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics specifically focuses on this idea that we have these constant branches taking place with new universes budding off, and there's a lot of real problems with that. With regard to the conservation of mass and some other issues with regard to visiting or affecting other timelines, like how to get back to your timeline or how they may be different in between. But even outside of those, this is another one of those things that we can't fully know until we've melded general relativity and quantum mechanics. But the many worlds interpretation is interesting. I especially like what you just said there about how they could be from our same time, but a slightly more
the
advanced version of
multi-universe
them.
are further, if the multi-universe there exists, what if some of our of these other versions of ourselves in these other realities within the multi-universe are further into the evolutionary process? And what if these so-called aliens are not only coming back from our timeline, but from the future, but coming from the future from other dimensions within this multi-universe?
Yeah, and it's an interesting idea that they're from another timeline that just happens to have moved faster or gotten a start rather than 6 million years ago with our own 10 million years ago, and they have more advanced technology. And I, like I said, I mostly approach this question in the context of block time in the book, and I don't go into the multiverse or the many worlds interpretation too much, just because honestly, many people think it can't be tested. And that is problematic from a scientific standpoint. If something's not testable, falsifiable, and repeatable, well, we can't do much with it. And this model I present is falsifiable. If it makes a prediction about a future state of humanity, that we will continue and that we will continue to have the same evolutionary changes that characterized the last 6 million years and the same cultural changes progressing into the future, and that we will become them. We at some point will be the ones traveling back through time in these UFO disc shaped craft, triangle shaped craft, and other shapes. And if that's a testable hypothesis, it's making a prediction about something that we can know in the future, whether that's accurate or not. But
Did,
the multiverse, it doesn't fit into that aspect of falsifiability. We can't know that. And in fact, many people who research quantum mechanics find that to be a fault of the model unto itself, even outside of the UFO phenomenon. That if there's no way to observe these other universes, how can we ever test that?
what about CERN, Michael? Because do you think that CERN, the Large Hadron Collider, is actually an experiment to examine what time is and maybe other, I guess, dimensions? And maybe they're actually working on time travel. I know that's a big theory and speculation, but tell me what your thoughts on CERN, the Large Hadron Collider. What do you think they're working on exactly? Uh, Because
Well,
of course they're going to tell you one thing, but they may not tell you. They may not give you the whole pie. They may just give you a slice.
sure, yeah. I mean, the whole reason it was set up was to research particle physics, and they discovered the Higgs boson and all of these other uh, just tiny, tiny little things, like I was saying, that microcosm in particle physics, and it's been hugely informative. We almost had it here in the U.S. There was for a short time we were almost trying to build down in your neck of the woods. I think it was going to be down in the South around Louisiana, Alabama, if I remember correctly.
Great, Michael. I don't mean to interrupt, but if they did that, they might create a black hole and just get rid of the South.
Yeah, it was all those assholes from the North that won the Civil War that were like, let's just make a black hole in the South. We'll just suck them all up. But no, they got it in Europe, and they've done a tremendous job. There's been so much just groundbreaking research that's come out of it, and I'm sure if they realized the possibility to learn more about time, they would. And that might be one of the best avenues to do it right now. And that might be where we finally bridge that gap between quantum mechanics and general relativity is at the smallest level. Because general relativity is very it's large, especially with Minkowski's research and geometric space-time. It's all of these big things, but once we understand the small to a really deep and really deep level, we may be able to combine those. So, yeah, I think there's a good possibility that answers about what time is and how it works and how we move through it could come from research they're doing at CERN.
What about, have you looked into, like, what do you think, and maybe others in your field, have you had conversations about with other colleagues with maybe deja vu? Could there be a correlation with some tampering? I know you kind of explained this a while ago, but could there be a correlation with some of the tampering of timelines in the present from those coming from the future and our bizarre personal experiences with deja vu? Tell me what you think about that, Michael.
Well, that's one of few things I can speak about on a personal level.
I
I've
get them
never
all the
had.
time, dude. Get them all the
Yeah,
time.
me too. Yeah, it's super intense. And I've never seen a UFO. I've never had a close encounter, so I can't really speak to that aspect of the phenomenon from a personal standpoint. But I do have really intense deja vu, and I have my entire life. And the way I understand it, or at least how I've justified it to myself, is that our consciousness is unbound from physical reality. That there's this interplay between our consciousness, the energy of our brains, and the physical dendrites and axons and the neurons that exist within our skulls. But once we die, what's that consciousness leaves clearly when something dies. It's not animated. Where does that go? And if it's not bound by time, what I think happens is that cliche light at the end of the tunnel is just us starting over. We're coming back out into the world. We're seeing the lights in the hospital room or wherever, and our consciousness re-enters our brains at that point of birth, and we just constantly cycling through this birth death. And that also helps us understand this fleeting sense of now, like this idea that now exists. It doesn't. There's no way to pinpoint that moment in time of now, of this present. And it's been something philosophers and physicists have struggled with for forever, since we started talking about it. So it's my own personal belief system. It's how I tried to understand this phenomenon. But like I will see things in dreams in a subconscious state, which also is likely unbound from time in many ways. And then those exact moments, not just, oh, I kind of remember this, but the exact moment where I know what people are about to say, and I remember the smells and the feel of the air on my skin, the temperature around me, all of those things I dreamt about before, in the context of my biological passage of time, before they happen, but clearly they already happened. And this also fits within the block universe, the block time model, where they're already going to happen. They're already in my future. And my consciousness is aware of them before I get to them. And that would make sense if we're just constantly in this space between birth and death. We're always there, but we're sensing the passage of time as we move through it from birth to death throughout eternity. Essentially, we're always in these bodies and brains, with our consciousness moving through. It's getting up with the clocks. It's moving with the firing of our brains. And perhaps sometimes at night when we're dreaming, we can transcend that a little bit. We can get out of that movement, this linear flow of time, and explore the cabin, so to speak.
And I was going to ask you about the dreams too. I was going to ask you, because sometimes these dreams, they're so real. Is it
Yeah.
and these crazy things you just can't explain. Briefly, I've told this before, but briefly, my ex girlfriend, probably 10 years ago, I had a dream. Or she told me about. I told her about my dream that I was running through the desert and ran through this house and hid up underneath this car. But there's somebody was with me, but I couldn't tell who it was in the dream. But it was a woman. And then she's like, "Get out of here. Get out of here." And I said, "What?" She said, "I dreamed the same thing, running through a desert, going to the house,
Oh wow.
got up underneath the car, and she had some guy with her, but she couldn't tell who it was."
Yeah.
You know, crazy, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it
It
is,
gives me
absolutely.
chills just even thinking about it, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, no, I'll wake up a lot and tell my wife about something that I was dreaming about, and she's always like, "So is it a real dream or a fake dream?" Because you can tell them apart. After this happens to you enough throughout your life, it's very clear whether you're having a dream about something that's gonna happen or, you're just floating around in the ether, falling from castles in the sky and whatnot. And yeah, it's been fun. I feel like I've gotten better at identifying those, but also becoming a part of them and seeing things happen in the future in the past. And it's really it probably sounds like crazy talk, but it's a very real thing. It's one of those things where if you experience it, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, I'm sorry, because it's kind of fun. Lucid
Mhm.
dreaming too. Lucid dreaming is super fun. Like getting into that space where time doesn't pass the same way and where gravity doesn't affect you and just doing whatever the hell you want in your brain. That's a super fun thing to do. And I think it would really benefit a lot of people to get in touch with that more because it gives you such a deep sense of yourself and in your mind. It's really amazing.
And we're about to I have a few questions before we round things up. We're going to get back to, I want to ask you about abductions here in just a moment. But man, I'm just having I love that. I feel like a fat kid in a candy store, Michael. I'm loving this conversation. Anyways,
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
quickly before we get into abductions, but now you mentioned consciousness and everything a while ago. So, have you ever had the living hell scared out of you? And like I'm sure you have, and everybody else, and you feel this jump within your body, like a jolt. Do you think
Yeah.
that's your consciousness or something else? Because it's not your heart. It's not, you're not moving, but you feel this. It's like something just feels like it's almost about to escape from your body. It's
Hmm.
almost like your consciousness. Okay, this isn't real. I just got terrified and I almost left, almost died, and left this body. I don't know. I know it's crazy. I know that's a
No,
crazy
no, I see
to
what
think
you're
about,
saying.
but
I see what you're saying. That kind of makes sense. Like you're so frightened that you jump out for a second. Yeah.
But
Um,
but 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 your physical body doesn't move. I've been scared before, and
yeah.
your physical
Yeah.
body doesn't move, but you feel that thump, and it's like, what the
Yeah.
was that? You
Yeah.
know?
Right. No, yeah, that's really interesting. I never thought about that before, but it definitely makes sense. Yeah, if you've got this energy in your brain, kind of honestly, something that I think it is, nobody knows what consciousness is. It's the same as time. We don't know what it is yet. But personally, I think it exists as some quantum entanglement where our consciousness is like the wave function superimposed upon our biological, physical, cerebral selves, if that makes any sense at all. Like the the superimposed states essentially. And I don't know how the hell to test that or what I would do to look into that more, but it feels like our consciousness is kind of a quantum wave function, I guess is what I'm saying. And yeah, I mean, in the context of being scared or excited, and you can feel that with other people. That's why I really think this is there's almost a resonation, like a frequency that we have, and we can sense other people's energies. And a lot of times, there's people you meet and you instantly have a connection with them, and there's that sort of wave resonance where there's wave destruction with people that you don't get along with. You feel this tension and negative energy with them. And yeah, I mean, I think those moments where you're really scared or excited sort of give you a deeper sense of what that energy aspect of our consciousness is. Yeah, that's interest. That's a really interesting thought. I like that.
So with alien abductions, s- so how does your research explain the abduction phenomena, Michael? Is it possible that we are coming back from the future to possibly? I know I'm asking to speculate, but is it possible that we are coming back from the future to possibly conduct experiments to prevent something from happening in the future that went wrong with the human race?
Um, Well, I mean, to say that we could change anything in the past kind of gets away from that aspect of the self consistency, unless we were always going to have done that thing in the past and it always elicited that effect in the future where it did help. But then again, how can you know that you needed to do that thing in the past if your future is all roses and there's nothing that needs change? So the paradox is almost more associated with the idea that you can change the past than it is that you can't, and that it's already locked into block time. But no, it's a really interesting aspect of the phenomenon. I'll get back to the abduction part in a second, but all of the attention to our nuclear weapons and all of the people who have been told take care of the earth, like to me, that's strong evidence for them being us in the future. They're stakeholders in our future. Why else would beings that happen to be bipedal and big brained and small faced and look so much like us, but from a different planet, give two shits what we do with our planet? You know, why would they care? But if they are us from the future, they have every right to care and every reason to care. Um, so yeah, to me, that's if these things are happening and people are being told, uh, watch out for nukes, watch out for zealots and charlatans and politics and climate change and things that could affect them in the future, that kind of makes sense in the context of time travel. But the abductions too, to me, is one of the most almost obvious things that about their humanness is they're described so often as humanoid, and the variation that's seen too, like the more Nordic features or the more East Asian characteristics, and they're so often described as being just like us, but just a little bit different. And what they do, especially in these abduction accounts, the things that they do, it almost always involves a lit room with a table, and they're laid down on the table and they're examined, and there's machines that do things that scan them. There's individuals, humanoid beings standing around them taking uh, skin samples, hair samples, fecal samples, semen samples. That's exactly what I would do as an anthropologist, as someone who studies the past. If I had access to time travel technology, I would be doing all of those things. I mentioned earlier, I've gotten to work at many different archaeological sites, prehistoric, Paleolithic sites, and we're left with fossils and teeth and the cultural remains. If we could go back and pick these individuals up, that's a very good reason to do that, is to get that knowledge of our past, to investigate the past using this technology available to us, to see the real living individuals with soft tissue preserved. It's not just their fossilized bones that we dig up millions of years later, but it's them as they lived. We can get the DNA, we can get all of these different tissues. And to me, that it makes sense. It just makes sense why they do the things they do if they are indeed us from the future.
Well said, Michael. Now, have you, before we round things up, have you looked into the Philadelphia experiment any?
Oh man, it's funny you bring that up.
Because they were supposedly they time
Yeah,
traveled, or they
yeah,
I think it was to 1980 something or 70s or something
right.
like that.
Yeah, so I got asked about that once, and I was like, "No, I've never heard of that." And then I Googled it, and I honestly can't tell you a damn thing about what I found when I Googled it. Wasn't it something with like a device somebody created, or some sort of Tesla type situation? I don't know. I'm totally drawing a blank on that one. I apologize, but yeah, I do remember some sort of different time.
Well,
si-
according to Wikipedia, which we know that can be, that can be altered, but
It's hit or miss. Yeah.
yeah, the Philadelphia experiment is an alleged military experiment supposed to have been carried out by the U.S. Navy at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, sometime around October 28th, 1943. The U.S.
Okay.
Navy destroyer escort USS Eldridge was claimed to have been rendered invisible or cloaked to enemy
Right.
devices. The story first appeared in 1955 in letters of unknown origin sent to a writer and astronomer, Morris K. Jessup. It is widely understood to be a hoax. The U.S. Navy maintains that no such experiment. Of course, they wouldn't acknowledge it. If it was to take place, the U.S. Navy maintains that no such experiment was ever conducted. That the details of the story contradict well-established facts. I'm trying to see when do they, because they, but other articles and things I've looked into that it time traveled. I'm not sure. I forgot what year they went
Yeah.
into the future. And there's a I forgot his name, a researcher that you can find him on YouTube. You probably just type in Philadelphia experiment lecture. And this guy, he died maybe 10, 15 years ago, but he gives a really great presentation on the Philadelphia experiment. But yeah, it's is with this time travel talk that we're talking about. It is very interesting. And
Yeah.
another one, Michael, is now this one. Of course, have you heard of John Teeter? John Teeter.
Yeah. Yeah, that does sound
But
familiar.
it was a name used on several bulletin boards during 2000, 2001 by
Oh,
poster
wait,
claim.
wasn't he the guy that claims to have been a time traveler and got
Yeah,
on some forum? And I
yeah.
actually read that forum. I read the whole damn thing one day because I gave a talk in Livingston, Montana, and somebody came up and mentioned him. And then I went and I looked at that forum that he was allegedly on. And yeah, it was really interesting. It was very much the multi-universe type situation where there's different timelines, and he was in ours. And yeah. So yeah, no, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, and I need to read the entire form. I've only read bits and pieces, cliff notes, but
It's interesting. It's worth reading. Yeah, I mean, take it with a grain of salt, of course, because if somebody was just messing with those people, they're pretty woke. They're smart and
mhm.
informed and knew a lot. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I would recommend that everybody read it and form their own opinions about it.
Well, anyways, Michael, that's going to be it for this time. Man, I could talk to you for hours, but I like to keep these interviews, somewhat short because I know I'm not saying everybody's, but my attention span, an hour interview, because
Yeah.
or reading. I can only
Most
read
people
maybe.
are probably like scrolling through different parts too, look at our faces and see if we
Yep.
said something interesting.
But I know when it comes to reading, an hour tops. That's about it. My
Yeah,
wife, but
I know.
everybody's not like that
Yeah.
though. My wife, she can read 2 or 3 hours at a time. I'm like, how do you do that?
Yeah. I think anymore most of us are, especially with social media and YouTube. Like I watch my son and he watches a lot of fishing shows, all those douchebags from YouTube that just do stupid shit and think they're awesome. But he'll watch it for like 30 seconds and be like, no, nah. And just even if he's really interested, just flip to the next thing. Just that I think and I talk about that in the book actually, because we live life faster as children, and each generation gets bored with the things that the previous generation has been able to do longer simply because their brains work faster and there's more stimulus available to them because of cultural evolution. So I totally understand it. And I don't try to change that, but I know exactly what you're saying. I appreciate that you do that on your show because you're right. Nobody's going to sit around and listen to us talk for 3 hours, nor should they.
Talk about black holes in the South, and
Yeah.
so. But anyways,
Yeah.
Michael, is there where can people buy your book and give out your website again? Well, I think we
Yeah.
talked about pre-show. I don't think I gave it out in the beginning of the show.
No, Jesus Christ, man.
Yeah, my bad, my
I
bad.
never even mentioned the book. No, it's called Identified Flying Objects. And the website's just an abbreviated version of that, idflyobj.com, idflyobj.com. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but it's short. You can throw it into a Twitter post and it works. So yeah, idflyobj. There's links to anywhere you can buy the book online and talks and interviews and things. So that's probably the best resource, the hub, you could say.
All right, Michael, I appreciate it, man. And I'll have to have you on the near future. We can dive more into these topics because, man, like I said, I felt like a fat kid in a candy store. You know, we talked about some pretty wild stuff, but it makes you really think. It makes you wonder, you know, um, like what exactly, I guess with your research with time travel, it's very thought provoking, very thought provoking, and I salute you for your research for humanity, man. Because we need more people like you, especially with an academic point of view, to I guess in this field.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and I really hope more of my colleagues start coming out and investigating these things seriously too. Because I agree with you. We need scientists to do their jobs and get it in the front of this and move it forward.
All right, dude. I appreciate it, and you have a good one, man.
Cool. Yeah, you too. Take care.